When my mom's ring flashed twice during dinner, I froze. It wasn't just a reflection or a trick of the light. It was our secret signal, something we'd made years ago for emergencies. One flash meant, stay quiet. Two flashes meant, get ready to run. Before I could even ask what was wrong, the lights went out and she screamed my name. My name is Lena Hart, and I never imagined a normal family dinner would turn into the night that changed everything I knew about my family and my father's death. It had started like any other weekend. I had come home from college for a few days to see my mom, Diana, and my 15-year-old brother, Eli. Mom had been doing better lately. For years, she struggled with anxiety after Dad's accident. She used to check the locks 5 times before bed and wake up at every sound in the night. But recently, she'd started smiling again, baking again, and even talking about joining a pottery class. That night, she made my favorite meal: roasted chicken, garlic bread, and mashed potatoes. The 3 of us sat around the old oak table that my dad had built himself. For the first time in months, I felt relaxed. Eli was teasing Mom about burning the bread, and Mom was laughing, that soft, genuine laugh that had been missing for too long. I remember thinking how good it felt to have this warmth again. The kitchen smelled like comfort. The air was filled with small sounds: the clinking of forks, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock. It was one of those moments that felt perfectly ordinary, perfectly safe. Then Mom's phone buzzed. She looked down and her face changed. Not much, but enough for me to notice. Her expression froze for half a second before she quickly flipped the phone over, hiding the screen. She smiled, but it looked forced. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said softly, picking up her fork again. "Just spam." Eli didn't notice, but I did. I knew that tone, the one she used when she didn't want to worry us. She kept eating, but her hand was shaking slightly. When I glanced down, I saw her left hand resting on the table. Her wedding ring, the silver one she'd worn every day since Dad died, caught the light. Then it flashed, twice. I stopped breathing. That signal wasn't something we ever used lightly. We'd created it years ago, right after Dad's accident. Mom had been scared. She said if anything ever went wrong, we needed a way to communicate without speaking. 1 flash meant to stay calm. 2 meant danger. My eyes shot to hers. She didn't move her lips, but her eyes told me everything. "Don't speak." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Mom?" She smiled tightly. "You know what? I forgot the dessert in the kitchen," she said too quickly. "I'll be right back." Her chair scraped against the floor as she stood. I noticed how stiff her movements were, like every step took effort. She walked to the kitchen, but before she disappeared behind the doorway, the ring flashed again, twice. My stomach dropped. I turned to Eli. He was halfway through his second helping, completely unaware. "Eli," I whispered, "something's wrong." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "Mom just gave the signal." He looked confused. "What signal?" Before I could explain, the house went dark. The sound of the refrigerator stopped. The light from the hallway vanished, and the clock stopped ticking. The only thing I could hear was my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Mom?" I called out. No answer. "Mom, are you okay?" Then came the sound of shattering glass. A sharp scream followed, loud, terrified, and full of pain. It was her voice. "Lena!" I jumped to my feet. Eli's chair fell backward, hitting the floor. "Mom!" he yelled. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness as we ran toward the kitchen. The air felt cold, too cold for inside the house. The back door was wide open, the curtains blowing in the wind. "Mom!" I shouted again. There was no sign of her. The only thing left was her ring lying on the floor, faintly glinting in the light. My hand shook as I picked it up. The metal felt cold, colder than it should have been. Eli looked at me, his voice trembling. "Where's Mom?" I didn't have an answer. The power flickered back on for a split second, and in that flash of light, I saw something outside. A figure standing near the tree line, just beyond the yard. The shape of a man, tall, unmoving, watching us. When the lights went out again, he was gone. That night was the moment everything changed. The night I realized my family had secrets buried deeper than I ever imagined. And Mom's signal wasn't just a warning. It was a message she knew I would understand too late. If you want to know what really happened after that night, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The truth about that signal was something I never expected to uncover. The next few seconds after my mom's scream felt like hours. Eli and I searched every corner of the kitchen, calling her name again and again, but she was gone. The back door swung open, letting in the cold night air. The curtains fluttered against the walls, and shards of glass from a broken bowl glimmered on the floor. The whole house felt wrong, silent but heavy, like it was holding its breath. "Call her phone," I said, my voice trembling. Eli fumbled with his phone, but there was no signal, not even Wi-Fi. He looked up at me, panic rising in his voice. "Lena, the router's dead. I think the power cut the line." My heart thudded so hard it hurt. "Try anyway." He dialed, but the call went straight to voicemail. That calm, familiar, recorded voice. "Hi, this is Diana. Leave a message." Cut through me like a knife. She had been screaming seconds ago, and now she was unreachable. I turned on every light in the house, my phone flashlight still shaking in my hand. "Lock the doors," I told Eli. He nodded and ran toward the front door while I checked the living room. Everything looked normal. The TV, the books, the photos on the wall. But it all felt off. I looked at the family picture from last Christmas, and a strange chill crept down my spine. Mom's smile in the photo looked genuine, but there was something I hadn't noticed before. Her left hand, the one with the silver ring, was curled into a fist. That same ring now sat in my pocket, cold and silent. When I stepped outside onto the back porch, I noticed footprints on the deck. One set was my mom's slippers, but beside them was another, larger pair, heavy boots. They led off the porch into the backyard and disappeared into the grass near the trees. "Mom," I called out, my voice cracking. The wind carried the word away. Eli appeared behind me. "Lena, don't go out there. The cops are coming, right?" I hesitated. I had called 911 a few minutes earlier, but even the dispatcher's voice hadn't reassured me. Something in her tone, the way she repeated my address like she already knew it, had made me uneasy. I wasn't sure who I trusted anymore. I took a deep breath. We stay together. No one goes anywhere alone. We went back inside and locked the doors again. I tried to think rationally. Mom's ring had flashed twice, our signal for danger. She must have seen something, or someone. Maybe she'd run out to get help. Maybe she was hiding. But who was that man I'd seen near the trees? And how did he get here without us hearing anything? Eli sat on the couch, knees pulled to his chest. "What if she's hurt?" he whispered. "She's smart," I said quickly. "She wouldn't leave without a reason." He looked at me with wide eyes. "You think it's about Dad, don't you?" I froze. "What do you mean?" "Mom always said Dad's accident wasn't an accident," he said quietly. "She told me she thought someone was following him before he died. She said he'd been working on something secret. He used to tell her, 'If anything happens, protect the kids.'" Hearing him say that made my stomach twist. Mom had mentioned Dad's car crash before, but never like that. She said it was late, he was tired, and he swerved off the road. I had never questioned it, but now it didn't feel like the whole story. I sat beside Eli, trying to calm him. "Dad's been gone for years," I said softly. "Whatever this is, it's not about him." But I didn't believe myself. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the basement. Both of us jumped. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, my hand slick with sweat. The noise came again, a metallic clatter like something falling over. "Stay here," I whispered, moving toward the basement door. "No way!" Eli hissed, following me. We crept down the stairs together. The flashlight beam wavered across the walls, catching old boxes and shelves. Everything looked normal until we reached the bottom. The circuit breaker had been switched off manually. Someone had cut the power. And then, just below it, something new caught my eye. A muddy handprint on the wall. My breath caught. "Mom?" I whispered, but the handprint was too large to be hers. Eli pointed to the corner. "Lena." I turned the light that way, and my blood ran cold. There was a folded piece of paper sitting on the workbench. On it, in black ink, were 3 words. "Don't trust him." What does that mean? Eli asked, his voice shaking. I don't know, I said, though I had a terrible idea forming in my mind. Maybe she wrote it before I could finish. A loud knock echoed upstairs. We both froze. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. Eli whispered, "It's the police, right?" I looked up toward the ceiling, where the sound had come from. Something in my gut told me it wasn't. "Stay quiet," I said. The knocking came again, louder this time. Then a voice, calm, deep, too steady. "Miss Hart, it's the police. We got your call." For a second, I almost believed it. But then I remembered the message on the paper. Don't trust him. I motioned for Eli to stay silent. My pulse roared in my ears. That's when I saw it. Through the crack under the door leading upstairs. 2 shadows. One was still, the other moving, and the one that moved was barefoot. The air seemed to disappear from the room. Someone else was in the house. I gripped the knife tighter, whispering, "Eli, no matter what happens, don't make a sound." The next sound we heard wasn't the knock. It was footsteps, coming down the stairs. The sound of those footsteps on the basement stairs changed everything. They were slow, deliberate, heavy. Each step made the old wood creak, echoing through the dark space like a countdown. I turned off the flashlight instantly and grabbed Eli's arm, pulling him behind an old metal shelf filled with paint cans. We crouched there, holding our breath. My hand was trembling so hard I had to press it against my leg to stop it from shaking. The air was thick and cold. I could hear Eli's quiet breathing beside me, uneven and scared. The footsteps stopped halfway down. Whoever was there knew we were listening. "Lena?" A man's voice called softly from the top of the stairs. "It's okay. It's the police. You're safe now." The voice was calm, too calm. My mind raced back to the note on the workbench. Don't trust him. If this person really was a cop, why hadn't he turned the power back on? Why was he coming down so quietly, without announcing himself properly? Every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't right. I looked at Eli. His eyes were wide, tears glinting under the faint light from the basement window. I put a finger to my lips, signaling him not to move. The footsteps resumed. Slow, careful, getting closer. When I saw the flashlight beam sweep across the far wall, I felt my heart slam in my chest. The beam moved like the person was scanning the room. I could see the outline of his shoes at the bottom of the stairs. Thick, black boots. The same kind of prints I had seen outside near the back porch. He stepped further in. "Lena, I just want to talk. Your mother's fine. We found her. She sent me." I almost believed him until he said that last part. My mom would never have sent anyone without calling me first. She would have said something only I'd understand. Our secret signal. Our phrase. Something. But there was nothing. Then I noticed something else. As his flashlight passed over the wall, it briefly illuminated his left hand. There was a glint of metal on his finger, a silver ring, and it flashed twice. I felt my stomach drop. That wasn't Mom's ring, but it was identical. I whispered to Eli, "We're leaving. Now." He nodded, terrified but trusting me completely. I grabbed the small emergency flashlight from the shelf and turned it on low, angling it toward the back of the basement. There was a small, rusted door that led to the old storm exit, a metal hatch my dad had installed years ago. We'd barely used it since. The man's footsteps moved closer to the center of the room. "You can't hide forever," he said, his voice now colder. I tightened my grip on Eli's hand. "When I say go, you run," I whispered. "Don't stop, no matter what." He nodded again. The man took another step. The floor creaked under his weight. The beam of his flashlight was only a few feet away now. "Go!" I shouted. Eli bolted toward the hatch while I grabbed one of the old paint cans and threw it across the room. It crashed loudly, and the man spun toward the noise, shouting, "Stop right there!" I ran after Eli, yanking the hatch open. Cold air rushed in. He scrambled through first. Then I climbed up behind him, scraping my hands on the rusty edges. Just as I pushed the door closed, something hit it from below with a loud thud. We sprinted across the backyard, barefoot and breathless. The grass was wet and the night air stung my skin. I could still hear him shouting behind us, his voice growing distant as we ran toward the neighbor's house. Eli stumbled, nearly falling, but I caught his arm and pulled him up. "Almost there," I whispered. When we reached the porch, I banged on the door. "Mrs. Green, it's Lena. Please open up." The lights inside flicked on, and our elderly neighbor appeared, shocked and half asleep. "Lena? What on earth? Someone's in our house," I cried. "Call the police." She didn't ask questions. Within seconds, she was on the phone, her hands shaking as she gave our address. We sat there on her porch, soaked and shivering, while she locked the door behind us. I wrapped my arms around Eli, who was crying quietly now. The fear had caught up to him. "It's okay," I whispered, even though I didn't believe it myself. Minutes later, real police cars pulled into the driveway, sirens flashing blue and red. Officers rushed toward our house, guns drawn. I tried to tell them everything: the power outage, the man in the basement, the ring, the note. One of them radioed something to his partner, then turned to me with a strange expression. "Ma'am, we've been searching the property for the last 10 minutes. There's no one inside." My head spun. "That's impossible. He was right there. He followed us down the stairs." The officer frowned. "The back door was open, but there are no footprints, no signs of forced entry." Before I could argue, another patrol car arrived. A female officer stepped out and walked toward me. Her face was pale, her voice quiet but urgent. "We found someone about 2 blocks away, a woman. She's hurt but alive. She had this." She held up a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was my mom's phone and her silver ring. My heart leapt into my throat. "Where is she?" I asked. "She's being taken to St. Mary's Hospital. She kept saying your name. And one more thing." The officer paused. She said, "Don't let him back in the house." I didn't understand it then, but those words would haunt me for weeks. Because when we returned home the next morning, after the sun came up, I saw something on the kitchen table that hadn't been there before. A muddy handprint. And next to it, written in black marker, were 4 words. "You forgot the signal." I couldn't take my eyes off those 4 words scrawled across our kitchen table. "You forgot the signal." The handwriting was jagged, almost childlike, as if written in a rush. The mud underneath it was still wet. Someone had been in the house recently, maybe even while we were talking to the police outside. My stomach twisted. This wasn't over. Whoever had come for my mom knew exactly what they were doing, and they weren't finished. Eli stood behind me, silent, staring at the message. "What does that mean?" he whispered. I forced myself to sound calm. "It means we need to leave, now." But before we could, one of the officers came inside, scanning the room. "You said the guy wore a ring, right?" he asked. "Yes," I said quickly. "Silver, like my mom's." He exchanged a look with his partner, then motioned for me to follow him outside. There was a police car parked by the curb, and inside it sat my mom, wrapped in a blanket. Her face was pale and bruised, but when she saw me, she smiled weakly. I ran to her, tears welling in my eyes. "Mom!" She reached out and pulled me into a shaky hug. "You're safe, thank God." "What happened? Who was he?" I asked, my voice breaking. Her grip tightened on my hand. "It's not over, Lena. He'll come back." Before I could ask who she meant, an officer stepped forward. "Mrs. Hart, we're taking you to the hospital for evaluation." She shook her head stubbornly. "I'm not leaving my kids." "Mom, please," I said. "You need to go. We'll be fine." She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the house. "Check your father's box," she whispered. "In the attic. He left something for you." Then they led her to the ambulance, and she was gone again, sirens fading into the distance. The attic. I hadn't been up there in years. My dad had used it as his office before he died, filled with old files and boxes that no one had touched since. But now I felt drawn to it, like it was the only place that could give me answers. Eli stayed downstairs with the officers while I climbed the narrow steps to the attic. The air was stale and heavy with dust. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered when I pulled the chain. Rows of boxes lined the walls, labeled with my dad's neat handwriting: bills, photos, documents. Near the back, I found one that stood out. It was newer than the others, sealed with black tape and marked only with a small silver H, our last initial. My hands shook as I pulled it open. Inside were old newspaper clippings, faded photos, and a thick folder filled with letters. The first clipping was from a decade ago. The headline read, "Engineer whistleblower dies in car crash. Police rule accident." My dad's name was under it. I scanned the article, my heart pounding. It said my dad, Robert Hart, had worked for a company called Solent Systems, a government contractor specializing in security technology. According to the report, he'd been preparing to testify against the company for illegal surveillance activities before he died in a single vehicle accident. I turned the page and found a letter addressed to my mom in my dad's handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it out. They'll come for you eventually. Don't trust anyone with a badge. They have people everywhere. The ring has a tracker. Use the light to signal danger, but don't wear it for too long. They can find it." My hands went cold. The ring, the one my mom wore every day, wasn't just jewelry. It was a tracking device. I felt the air shift behind me. The faint sound of a floorboard creaked. "Eli?" I called out softly. No answer. I turned around slowly, my chest tightening. A man stood at the top of the attic stairs. He was tall, dressed in black, his face hidden by the shadow cast from the flickering bulb. He stepped forward, and I saw the glint of silver on his hand. The same ring. "Stay away from me," I said, backing up. He smiled faintly. "You shouldn't have gone looking, Lena. Your father didn't understand the cost of silence. But you will." He reached for his pocket, and I saw the shape of a gun. My body reacted before my mind did. I threw the box at him and lunged toward the window, grabbing the old metal flashlight from the shelf. When he stepped closer, I swung it as hard as I could. It hit him across the face with a dull thud. He stumbled, swearing under his breath. I bolted for the stairs. "Eli, run!" The officers downstairs heard the noise and came rushing in. For a second, everything was chaos. Shouting, footsteps, the crack of something breaking. Then came the gunshot. The sound rang through the house like thunder. I froze halfway down the stairs, heart in my throat. But then I heard a yell from below. The man was down. One of the officers had tackled him. When I reached the living room, 2 cops were handcuffing him as he lay face down, blood trickling from his nose. The silver ring was still flashing faintly on his finger. The officer who'd arrested him glanced at me. "He's one of ours. Or at least, he used to be. Former agent. Fired 5 years ago for tampering with evidence. Looks like he didn't take it well." I felt dizzy. "He worked for Solent, didn't he?" The officer hesitated. "That's classified, ma'am." Which was answer enough. They took him away that night, but before he was shoved into the car, he looked right at me and smiled. A cold, knowing smile that made my skin crawl. "It doesn't end with me," he said quietly. "You think you know the truth, but your mother hasn't told you everything." The car door slammed shut, and he was gone. I stood in the doorway, watching the flashing lights fade. Eli came up beside me, gripping my hand. "Is it over?" he asked softly. I wanted to tell him yes, but deep down, I knew that man was right. When I went back upstairs to pack the evidence box, I noticed something I hadn't before, a second ring lying at the bottom of the box, identical to my mom's. It blinked twice. The power flickered, and the house went dark again. The lights came back on a few minutes later, but by then, my hands were still shaking. The second ring sat in my palm, cold and heavy, its tiny blinking light now still. I didn't understand how something so small could cause so much fear, or how a simple signal could hold the weight of an entire family's secret. That night, after the police left, the house was quiet again, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Every sound, the ticking clock, the creak of the floor, even the wind brushing against the windows, made me jump. It was like the walls themselves remembered everything that had happened. Eli had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up under a blanket, exhausted after hours of chaos and questions. I sat beside him, staring at the silver ring on the coffee table. The officers said we were safe, that the man they'd arrested was part of something bigger, but that his arrest would close the case. But I knew better. My father's story, my mother's warnings, and now the message on the kitchen table "You forgot the signal," all pointed to something deeper, something still out there. At sunrise, the house looked almost normal again. The police tape around the front door was gone. The broken glass had been swept up. The quiet hum of electricity filled the air again, steady and familiar. For a few minutes, I let myself believe we could move on. But as I cleaned the table, I noticed faint outlines where the words had been written, as if the message had burned itself into the wood. I ran my hand over it, and the words came back to me like an echo. "You forgot the signal." By mid-morning, we were at the hospital. Mom was awake but weak. The bruises on her arms were dark, and her voice was hoarse. But when she saw us, her eyes filled with tears. "You're okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. I was so scared. Eli rushed into her arms, crying softly. I stood near the foot of the bed, feeling everything and nothing at the same time. When she looked at me, her expression changed. It wasn't relief anymore. It was guilt. "You found the box, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "I had to. You told me to." She took a shaky breath. "Your father didn't die because of an accident. You know that now." I swallowed hard. The ring, the company, Solent Systems. He was going to expose them. Tears welled in her eyes. "He told me they were watching. He thought if anything happened to him, I could protect you both with the signal. But I didn't know they'd come back. I thought they'd forgotten about us." "They didn't," I said quietly. "They sent him, the man who had the ring." Mom closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "That ring wasn't his. It was your father's. They must have taken it after he died. It was meant to find us." For a long time, no one spoke. The machines beeped steadily beside her bed, the sound of life continuing despite everything that had happened. Eli clung to her, refusing to let go. When Mom finally looked at me again, her voice was steady. "Promise me something, Lena. Never let them make you afraid to tell the truth. That's what your father died for. And if anything happens, you use the signal, not to run, but to fight." I wanted to promise her, but the truth was, I wasn't sure how. How do you fight something you can't see? How do you protect your family from ghosts that hide behind technology, behind lies, behind badges? I just nodded, hoping she couldn't see the fear behind my eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room staring at both rings, my mom's and the one from the box. Identical, perfectly polished. I turned them over in my hands again and again, wondering if they were still connected to something or someone. Finally, curiosity got the best of me. I wrapped the second ring in aluminum foil, grabbed a hammer, and smashed it open. Inside was a microchip no bigger than a grain of rice. Wires, sensors, and something that looked like a tiny transmitter. My stomach dropped. Dad hadn't just been protecting us. He'd built this. The ring wasn't just a signal. It was a warning system. The light flashes had meaning, not just between us, but for anyone who knew how to read them. Eli came downstairs and stood at the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Lena, are you okay?" I forced a small smile. "Yeah, just thinking." He came closer, looking at the broken ring. "Are we safe now?" I looked at him for a long time. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But we're smarter now. That's something." The next morning, Mom was discharged, and we decided to leave town for a while. The house held too many memories, too much noise even in its silence. We packed what we needed and drove west, away from the familiar roads and the shadows that seemed to follow us. A few hours into the drive, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from an unknown number. My hands tightened on the phone as I opened the message. It was a photo, a grainy image of our house taken from across the street. Underneath, a short message read, "You learned well. Don't stop now." I felt my throat tighten. Mom glanced at me from the passenger seat, her face pale. "Who is it?" I showed her the phone. She stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "Then it's starting again." I didn't know what she meant, but somehow I understood. Maybe the danger wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. But this time, we weren't just running. I slipped the unbroken ring back onto my finger and looked out the window as the sun rose behind us. The light hit the silver band just right, and for a moment it flashed. Once, then twice. Only this time I didn't freeze. I smiled, because now I knew what it meant. If this story gave you chills, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Tell me, what would you have done if your mother flashed a secret signal right before the world around you went dark?